daughter and her husband changed the locks on my own house while I was at my sister's funeral. When I came home to find my suitcase sitting on the porch like I was a hotel guest who'd overstayed his welcome, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I pulled out my phone and made 2 calls. 5 days later, they were leaving voicemails at 2 in the morning, begging me to pick up. I want to tell you what happened because I'm still processing some of it myself. My name is Norman. Norm to anyone who's known me longer than 10 minutes, and I spent 34 years working quality control at a pharmaceutical packaging plant outside Columbus, Ohio. I retired at 62 with a pension, a bad left knee, and a savings account that would surprise most people who saw me driving my 12-year-old Silverado. My wife, Catherine, passed from ovarian cancer 6 years ago. That loss is a whole other story, one I can't tell without my voice going sideways, so I'll leave it there. What I will say is that after Catherine died, I rattled around our house in Westerville like a marble in a shoebox, and when my daughter and her husband suggested I move to Portland to be closer to them, I thought it was the most generous offer anyone had made me in years. I should have paid more attention to the word suggested. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter throughout because that title still means something to me even when her behavior hasn't earned it, is 41 years old. Her husband is 44. They'd been living in a 3-bedroom Craftsman in a neighborhood called Selwood for 2 years when they floated the idea. Their mortgage payments were running them tight, they said. Property taxes in Oregon had crept up again, they said. And wouldn't it be wonderful, they said, if we could all be together? I remember sitting at their kitchen table during a visit in February, watching steam rise from my coffee and thinking that Catherine would have loved this house. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, a backyard with a Japanese maple that turned the color of a sunset in fall. I thought about how empty my nights had become. I thought about my daughter setting a plate of eggs in front of me the way her mother used to. I thought about what it might feel like to wake up somewhere that didn't echo. So when they showed me the numbers, their mortgage, their property taxes, their insurance, and gently pointed out that if I contributed monthly, we could pool resources like a real family, I agreed. I didn't agree because I was pressured. I want to be honest about that. I agreed because I wanted it to work. I signed my name on a formal loan agreement where I was listed as co-borrower, took over a monthly payment of $1,900, and moved into the largest of the 3 bedrooms that March. The first year was genuinely good. Sunday dinners. My daughter and I watching old movies on the couch while her husband worked late. I'd fix things around the house, the gutter that had pulled loose, the bathroom faucet that dripped, the gate latch that never caught right, and feel useful in the way that retirement had quietly taken from me. My son-in-law and I weren't close, but we were cordial. We talked football during halftime. He accepted my cooking without complaint, but somewhere in year 2, things began to shift in ways I couldn't quite name at the time. My daughter stopped suggesting I join them when friends came over. My son-in-law started responding to my questions with the kind of one-word answers that aren't exactly rude, but make clear that the conversation is finished. I'd come into the kitchen and the room would get slightly quieter. Nothing dramatic. Nothing I could point to and say, there, that's the moment. Just a slow, steady withdrawal. Like a tide going out so gradually you don't notice until you're standing on wet sand wondering where the water went. By year 3, I was eating most dinners alone in my room. I told myself it was a phase. I told myself that adult children need their space and that I should be more considerate. I reorganized my schedule around theirs, kept my music low, stopped using the living room television after 9. I became, without meaning to, a very quiet tenant in my own home. Because it was my home. My name was on the deed. I'd made every single mortgage payment. That was a fact I held on to without fully understanding why it mattered so much to cling to. Then my sister Diane called in early November. She'd been sick for a while. Lung disease that had nothing to do with smoking, just the bad luck of biology, and the call was the one I'd been dreading. She was in hospice in Tucson. The doctors were saying days, maybe a week. I booked a flight the same afternoon. I told my daughter where I was going. I told her I didn't know exactly how long I'd be. She nodded and said, "Of course, go," and for just a moment she looked like the girl I remembered. I hugged her at the door and drove to the airport feeling, strangely, a little lighter. Like maybe the distance between us was just about proximity and time. Diane passed 4 days later, quietly, with me holding her hand. I stayed 2 more days to help her neighbor, the woman who'd been checking on her, figure out what to do with the cat and the plants and the mail. Then I flew home. I took a cab from PDX because I didn't want to bother anyone. It was a Thursday afternoon, overcast the way Portland is overcast for 8 months of the year, and I was tired in that particular way that grief makes you tired, not sleepy, just hollowed out. The cab turned onto my street, and I saw my suitcase on the porch before I even registered what I was looking at. Not just my suitcase. 2 cardboard boxes, a duffel bag I didn't recognize as mine until I got closer and saw my own flannel shirts folded inside, a lamp from my bedroom, the framed photo of Catherine and me on our honeymoon in the Smoky Mountains, the one I'd kept on my nightstand for 38 years. I paid the driver and sat on the porch steps for a full minute before I tried my key. The lock was different. New hardware, bright brass, not the tarnished original. I tried twice just to be certain. I called my daughter. Voicemail. I called my son-in-law. Voicemail. I sat on those steps for another 20 minutes in the November drizzle, looking at the photo of Catherine in the smeared plastic sleeve I'd pulled it into to keep the moisture off, and I made a decision. Not an angry decision, just a clear one, the kind that comes when you finally had enough of not understanding what's happening and choose to simply start acting. I called a locksmith, not to get in, but to document that the locks had been changed without my authorization. He was confused by the request but obliged, photographed the new hardware, and wrote up a service call ticket noting that the registered co-borrower had been denied access. Then I called a cab to the Marriott on Morrison Street, checked into a room with a view of the parking garage, ordered room service soup because I hadn't eaten since the airport, and sat on the edge of the bed with Catherine's photo on the nightstand. "Well," I said to her, "this is something." She would have known what to do. She always did. In the morning I called Whitfield and Associates, an estate and property law firm I'd walked past on Burnside 100 times and always assumed was for people with more money than me. I explained the situation in what I hoped was a calm voice. The receptionist put me through to a junior attorney named, and I'm giving you his real first name because he deserves the credit, a young man named Theodore who said he could see me that afternoon. I arrived with the folder I always kept in my laptop bag, mortgage documents, property tax receipts, the co-borrower agreement, my payment records going back 3 years. Theodore spread them on the conference table with the methodical attention of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, and then he looked up at me. "Mr. Kelsey," he said, "you're not just a co-borrower. Based on how this deed was structured and given the payment history, you have a strong claim to primary ownership interest in this property." I asked him to explain that in plain English. He did. The short version, my daughter and son-in-law had never formally qualified for the loan independently. When we signed the paperwork 3 years ago, I had been listed as the primary borrower because my credit and income history were stronger. The deed reflected that. All $1,900 payments had come from my account. In the state of Oregon, with an attorney filing the right paperwork, I could establish that I was the de facto primary owner and initiate eviction proceedings if I chose to. I sat with that for a long moment. "They changed the locks while I was at my sister's funeral," I said. Theodore nodded. He didn't say he was sorry, which I appreciated. He just wrote something on his legal pad and asked how quickly I wanted to move. I told him I needed 1 day to think. That night in the hotel room, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was angry. The anger had already burned through and left something cleaner behind, but because I was doing arithmetic. 3 years of payments. The current market value of a craftsman in Selwood, which I looked up on Zillow while sitting on the hotel bed in my socks. $420,000, give or take. 3 years of payments at $1,900 a month. The utilities I'd paid. The repairs I'd made with my own hands and my own money. The new water heater. The fence sections I'd replaced. The roof inspection I'd ordered and paid for because my son-in-law kept saying he'd get to it. Then I did a different kind of arithmetic. The Sunday dinners that had stopped. The room that had gotten quieter when I walked in. The suitcase on the porch while my sister wasn't even cold yet. I called Theodore in the morning and told him to proceed. I also called a realtor. Her name was Paula, and a colleague at Theodore's firm had recommended her specifically for situations where a sale needed to happen quickly and cleanly. She was matter-of-fact and efficient, and when I explained that the current occupants would need to vacate, she asked her questions without any visible judgment and moved on. Selwood Craftsman in this condition, this square footage? She said, pulling up comps on her tablet. You're looking at 400, maybe 415 if we price it right and catch the right buyer. List it, I said, as soon as legally possible. While Theodore's office prepared the paperwork and Paula arranged photography, I dealt with the immediate practical problem of where to live. I extended my hotel stay, found a furnished apartment in the Pearl District available month to month, and moved my suitcase and boxes across town. The apartment was small and anonymous, and the bed was harder than I liked, but I put Catherine's photo on the nightstand and it felt like enough. I turned off notifications on my phone, but didn't turn the phone itself off, because Paula and Theodore needed to reach me. What I did do was stop answering calls from my daughter and son-in-law entirely. They started calling the second day after the locks were changed. Tentative at first, like they expected me to have quietly disappeared, and then more frequently as the week progressed. I read their voicemails without listening to them. My daughter's first few messages assumed I was staying with a friend and just needed to cool off. My son-in-law's were shorter, more careful, like a man who'd begun to suspect he'd miscalculated something. By the fourth day, a Saturday, I saw that my daughter had called 11 times before noon. Paula texted me that afternoon, showed the house this morning to 2 couples. Strong interest from the first. They have pre-approval. Clean offer incoming, I'd bet on it. I texted back, proceed with any qualified buyer. Full authority to accept. Then I went for a walk along the waterfront and watched the Willamette move past in that flat gray way it has in November. And I thought about Catherine, and about Diane, and about the particular loneliness of outliving the people who understood you best. And I thought about the fact that I was 66 years old with a pension, a savings account, no mortgage, and apparently a house worth $400,000 that I was about to turn into liquidity. It occurred to me that I had options I hadn't let myself imagine in years. My friend from the plant, a man I'd worked alongside for 20 years, a widower named Gerald who'd retired 3 years before me and moved to Scottsdale, had been telling me for the better part of a year to come visit. He'd been telling me the winters were mild and the golf was good, and that I was welcome to stay in his guest room for as long as I needed to figure out what came next. I booked a flight to Phoenix for the following Tuesday. I said Paula and Theodore my cell number, and told them I'd be reachable for anything essential but traveling for the foreseeable future. Paula confirmed the first couple had submitted an offer at 8,000. Theodore confirmed the eviction notice would be formally served the following week, giving the occupants 30 days to vacate per Oregon law. I landed in Scottsdale on a Tuesday afternoon to 72 degrees in a sky that had apparently never heard of clouds. Gerald picked me up from the airport in a golf cart. He lived in one of those communities where that's a legitimate form of transportation, and handed me a cold beer before I'd even set my bag down. "You look like a man who just made a decision," he said. "Couple of them," I said. I turned my phone to silent that evening. Not off. I wasn't hiding, just silent. I'd check it twice a day, morning and evening, for anything from Paula or Theodore. Everything else could wait. What I found when I checked my phone the next morning was 43 missed calls and a voicemail from my daughter that lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. I stood on Gerald's back porch in the early desert sun and listened to the whole thing. She'd found out about the sale. One of the neighbors had seen the photography crew and asked her about it, and she'd called Paula's office, and Paula, correctly professionally, had told her that the owner had authorized the listing, and she should direct any concerns to the owner directly. My daughter's voice on the voicemail moved through several stages: confusion, accusation, something that tried to sound like calm but wasn't, and then, in the last 40 seconds, something I hadn't heard from her in years. She sounded like she was 22 and needed her father. I listened to it twice, then I put the phone in my pocket and went inside to help Gerald make breakfast. My son-in-law's messages were a different thing. He'd clearly consulted someone, maybe an attorney of his own, because by the second day his voicemails had a particular quality: careful, measured, trying to establish a paper trail of reasonableness. He said things like, "We want to resolve this amicably and we're open to discussing an arrangement." He did not say, "I'm sorry we changed the locks while you were burying your sister." He did not say, "I regret the way we treated you these past 2 years." He said, "Resolve an arrangement and let's talk like a man negotiating a contract, not like a person who'd done something wrong." On the 5th day, my daughter left a message that was just her crying. No words, just 2 minutes of crying, and then the call ended. I won't tell you that didn't affect me. It did. I sat with my coffee and listened to it and felt the full weight of what it meant to be her father. But feeling something and doing something about it are different decisions, and I'd had 3 years of quietly swallowing my own feelings in that house, making myself smaller, moving my schedule around theirs, eating alone in my room like I was the inconvenience in my own home. Grief doesn't undo choices. Tears don't rewind locks being changed. Theodore called midweek to confirm the eviction notice had been formally served, 30 days to vacate. He also confirmed that the purchase agreement had been signed. The couple, a pair of teachers in their mid-30s who'd been looking in Selwood for 8 months, had waived the inspection contingency and were prepared to close in 3 weeks. They asked if they could move in a few days early, Theodore said. The sellers, the current occupants, have indicated they'll be out by day 28. Whatever works for the buyers, I said. I spent 2 weeks in Scottsdale. Gerald and I played golf badly and watched football in the afternoons and ate at a barbecue place 3 nights in a row because it was that good. I slept 8 hours a night for the first time in longer than I could remember. I went for walks in the early morning when the desert was still cool and thought about what I actually wanted the rest of my life to look like, a question I hadn't seriously asked myself since Catherine died. The answer that kept coming back was simpler than I expected. I wanted to stop performing gratitude for situations that weren't worth being grateful for. I wanted to live somewhere I chose, not somewhere I'd been invited into, and then slowly squeezed out of. I wanted to use my own kitchen at midnight if I felt like it without worrying about waking anyone up. Theodore called on a Thursday morning. Closing was complete. The funds, $408,000, minus his fees and realtor commission, netting me $381,000, were being transferred to my account. I sat on Gerald's back porch in the desert sun and tried to feel the full reality of that number, $381,000. Added to my pension and savings, it was more financial security than I'd had at any point in my life. It was also the physical value of 3 years of monthly payments and 30-some years of factory work, and the accumulated weight of trying to hold a family together through grief and stubbornness and an overabundance of hope. My daughter called that afternoon. I answered. She didn't yell. I think she'd moved through yelling somewhere in the previous 2 weeks and come out the other side into something quieter and harder to name. She asked where I was. I told her Scottsdale. She asked if I was coming back to Portland. I told her I didn't know yet. There was a long pause. We had to find an apartment, she said. We're in a 2-bedroom in Beaverton. I know, I said. Theodore kept me informed. Another pause. Daddy. She hadn't called me that in probably 15 years. I'm sorry about the locks. We thought you were just going to keep living there indefinitely, and we wanted our own lives, and we handled it badly. I waited for a moment before I answered, because I wanted to say the right thing, not just the thing that was sitting at the top of my chest. You were living in my house, I said. I paid the mortgage every month for 3 years. I fixed things and kept things up and made myself invisible so you two could be comfortable. And then you changed the locks while I was at Diane's funeral. I know, she said, very quiet. I'm not interested in a conversation where I end up apologizing for how I responded to that, I said. Maybe someday we can talk about what comes next, but not yet. I heard her breathing on the other end of the line for a moment. Okay, she said. We hung up. I sat there with the phone in my hand in the desert sun, making everything look like it was made of light, and I thought about Catherine and about what she would have said. She would have said that my daughter was still my daughter, and that time was shorter than people wanted to believe. She would have been right about that. She was usually right about the things that mattered. But she also would have said that I'd spent enough years taking care of everyone else, and that the person most overdue for some looking after was me. I went back inside and told Gerald I was thinking about staying through the new year. He went to the refrigerator and came back with 2 beers and a look on his face like a man who has been waiting a good long while for his friend to come to his senses. I had a pension and a savings account and $381,000 and no mortgage and no one scheduled to plan around. And somewhere out in front of me was a version of my life that I hadn't quite let myself picture yet. It was smaller in some ways than what I'd imagined when I drove to Portland 3 years ago with a truck full of furniture and a heart full of hope, but it was mine, actually, fully, legally, entirely mine. Sometimes that's the only kind of home that counts.